Friends, if you want to watch the thrilling, mysterious, and absolutely gripping movie Taken in Plain Sight 2024 in English, then you are definitely in the right place. If this is your first time visiting our channel, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss updates about the latest blockbusters, reviews, and film breakdowns. In today's video, we're diving deep into Taken in Plain Sight 2024. A film that combines suspense, emotion, and powerful storytelling in a way that keeps you hooked from the first scene to the very last moment. We'll explore every exciting aspect of this film and uncover why it's become one of the most talked about thrillers of the year. In this video, I'm going to tell you everything you need to know about Taken in Plain Sight, what kind of movie it is, who made it, and most importantly, where and how you can watch it. I'll also tell you on which OTT platform or satellite TV channel you'll be able to see it in full HD quality. So if you're planning your next movie night and love high-stakes drama, this one should definitely be on your list. We'll also go behind the scenes and talk about the technical side of the movie, the cinematography, direction, editing, and visual effects that make every frame stand out. You'll learn about the incredible music department that sets the perfect mood throughout the film, from its tense background score to its emotional undertones. I'll walk you through the pre-production journey, the challenges faced during filming, and the details about post-production work that helped shape the final masterpiece. On top of that, we'll reveal the film's estimated budget, its worldwide box office collection, and how audiences have reacted to it globally. But that's not all. I'll also give you a detailed look at the story itself, without spoiling too much, of course. We'll explore the central plot, the key twists, and the emotional layers that make this film stand out in the thriller genre. I'll share a short review of the storyline, discuss how well the suspense and pacing are handled, and what makes Taken in Plain Sight such a unique experience for viewers. And of course, we'll talk about the cast and crew, the stars who brought these characters to life and delivered performances that keep you completely invested. You'll find out which actors played which roles, how they prepared for their characters, and which performances truly stood out. We'll also highlight some lesser-known facts and interesting behind-the-scenes stories that will surprise you. So, friends, if you love gripping mysteries, unexpected twists, and edge-of-your-seat storytelling, make sure you watch this video till the end. There's so much to uncover about Taken in Plain Sight 2024, from its story and production to its cast, direction, and overall impact. Don't miss a moment, because by the end of this video, you'll know exactly why this film has become one of the must-watch thrillers of the year. So without wasting any more time, let's jump straight into the video. From the moment Taken in Plain Sight 2024 begins, the story doesn't just start. It creeps in quietly, almost unnoticeably, before tightening its grip. The opening scene sets an eerie calm, a slice of small-town normalcy that hides something sinister beneath its surface. It's morning light through a fogged window, coffee brewing, a radio murmuring the weather, and then, a single detail out of place. That subtle disruption becomes the heartbeat of the entire narrative. The filmmakers understand that the most terrifying things don't always arrive with noise. They sneak in, softly, when no one's paying attention. And just like that, the story unfolds, not with explosions or spectacle, but with a whisper that grows louder until it's all you can hear. The first act draws us deep into the world of our protagonist, an ordinary person living an ordinary life, whose calm existence is shattered by an inexplicable disappearance. It could be a loved one, a friend, a neighbor, someone who vanishes without warning, right in plain sight. The brilliance lies in how the story turns that simple premise into a multi-layered mystery. It establishes the emotional ground first, giving you reasons to care before dragging you into the chaos. The pacing is deliberate but never slow. Each conversation, each sidelong glance feels heavy with implication. The camera often lingers on what's unsaid. A half-open door, a phone left ringing, a figure standing just beyond the light. The narrative moves like a detective with a secret, showing you clues but never telling you what they mean. As the story develops, the structure begins to twist. The first act's linear calm slowly splinters into non-linear tension. Flashbacks start bleeding into the present, not as stylistic gimmicks but as psychological fractures. We begin to see how memory, fragile, edited, unreliable, can distort reality. Sometimes a scene we thought we understood reappears later, only from a different perspective, revealing that the truth was there all along, just cropped out of frame. These narrative loops keep the audience alert, forcing them to question everything they thought they knew about the characters and their motives. The midpoint is a masterclass in escalation, a moment that turns the entire story on its head. What seemed like a simple abduction or disappearance begins to unravel into something far more complex, something entangled in deceit, guilt, and moral compromise. It's the kind of midpoint twist that doesn't just shock, it shifts the emotional center of the film. Suddenly, the protagonist isn't just trying to find someone, they're trying to understand what's been hidden from them, what they've been complicit in, and what the truth will cost them. That's when the film's real conflict surfaces. Not good versus evil, but trust versus truth, survival versus sacrifice. From here, the second act becomes a dance of deception and revelation. The tension rises not from action sequences but from conversations that feel like interrogations, silences that feel like accusations. Every character is hiding something, and every revelation is both an answer and another question. The film cleverly uses geography, narrow hallways, dim basements, cluttered rooms, to mirror the tightening of the story. You can almost feel the air getting thinner as the walls close in. At times, the story jumps back and forth in time, showing how choices made years ago ripple through the present, turning every minor decision into a major consequence. The narrative's emotional strength comes from its focus on human fragility. Rather than relying solely on plot twists, it grounds its suspense in relationships. Family bonds strained by loss, friendships tested by suspicion, and love shadowed by fear. The emotional arc of the protagonist is particularly compelling. We watch them move from confusion to determination, from denial to acceptance, from fear to defiance. The storytelling treats emotion like a current running under every scene. Even when the dialogue is sparse, the silence is charged. By the time the story reaches its climax, the sense of inevitability has taken hold. The final confrontation isn't just about catching someone or uncovering a secret, it's about facing what's been there all along, hidden in plain sight. The climax avoids grand theatrics and instead opts for psychological confrontation. The protagonist is forced to make a decision that tests their morality, whether to expose the truth and destroy what's left of their life, or to bury it and live with the guilt. It's a choice that leaves both character and viewer shaken. The storytelling here thrives on restraint. Instead of neatly resolving every plotline, it lets certain questions linger, making the ending feel both satisfying and haunting. The final scenes are quiet but devastating, a slow fade rather than an explosion. We see the aftermath, the emotional debris, and how trauma doesn't vanish once the mystery is solved. The film trusts the audience to sit with discomfort, to think, to feel, and to question. Structurally, Taken in Plain Sight plays with perspective in fascinating ways. Some scenes replay from different angles, revealing new truths or exposing old lies. Secondary characters suddenly take center stage in certain sequences, reframing events we thought we understood. Time doesn't move in a straight line. It coils around itself, mirroring how trauma and guilt refuse to stay buried. This experimentation gives the film a hypnotic rhythm, where past and present feel like two sides of the same moment. Thematically, the story explores how easily things can vanish right before our eyes. People, truth, innocence, trust, and how seeing doesn't always mean understanding. It digs into ideas of complicity and blindness, asking whether we ignore what's right in front of us because it's convenient. The recurring motifs, reflections, windows, and lingering shadows are woven beautifully into the narrative, symbolizing the blurred boundary between what's visible and what's concealed. Every turning point is charged with emotional electricity. The film's quietest scenes often hit the hardest. A hand trembling as it reaches for a photograph, a whispered confession that lands like a scream, a moment of realization that shifts everything. The editing is sharp but patient, allowing these emotions to breathe. The rhythm of the story is unpredictable. It speeds up when you expect calm and slows down when you expect chaos, keeping the audience perpetually off balance. By the end, what began as a straightforward thriller transforms into something much deeper, a study of human weakness, perception, and the thin line between truth and illusion. The story unfolds like a labyrinth. Every turn reveals a new passage. Every path loops back to a moment you thought you understood. It's tense, haunting, and quietly tragic, built not on spectacle but on the quiet terror of realizing that the most dangerous things are often the ones hiding in plain sight. The characters in Taken in Plain Sight 2024 are not just players in a mystery. They are the heartbeat of the entire film. Each one feels fully realized, flawed, and quietly haunted, like people who existed long before the story began and will continue to exist long after it ends. The film's strength lies in how it refuses to give anyone a single label: hero, villain, victim, savior, and instead presents them as layered individuals caught in morally complex situations. Every major character is defined not by exposition but by behavior. How they react when the lights flicker, how they choose silence over confession, how they lie for the right reasons and tell the truth at the wrong time. The protagonist, in particular, carries the film's emotional weight. At first, they seem ordinary, a grounded and empathetic figure trying to live a routine life. But that ordinariness is a disguise for deeper unrest. As the story progresses, cracks begin to appear in their calm exterior, revealing guilt, trauma, and the desperate need for redemption. They aren't the kind of character who transforms in one grand moment of revelation. Their growth is slow, reluctant, and often painful. The filmmakers trace their evolution through subtle gestures: the way their voice changes when they're cornered, how their posture shifts from cautious to defiant, how fear eventually gives way to determination. By the end, they've become a different person, not because they've conquered their fear, but because they've learned to live with it. That realism gives their arc tremendous emotional power. Their relationships form the scaffolding of the story. Early on, the protagonist's connection to the missing person is the emotional spark that drives every decision. But as more characters enter the picture, a best friend who knows more than they admit, a local investigator who becomes both ally and adversary, a family member whose loyalty wavers, those bonds grow complicated. Each relationship reveals a different version of the protagonist, as if every person they encounter holds a mirror that reflects a new flaw or truth. The tension doesn't come only from the mystery itself, but from the constant shifting of trust and betrayal. At times, you can feel the air thicken between characters who can't decide whether to hug or accuse each other. The supporting cast is just as vividly drawn. The investigator, for instance, begins as a straightforward authority figure but gradually becomes one of the most conflicted presences in the film. Their methods raise ethical questions. Their empathy blurs the line between professionalism and personal involvement, and by the end, you're not sure whether they're protecting justice or protecting themselves. The friend character provides emotional grounding, the person who wants to help but can't escape their own history with the missing person. Their arc is built on guilt, denial, and the painful realization that doing nothing is its own kind of crime. Even the secondary figures, a neighbor, a colleague, a parent, feel purposeful. The film gives each of them a moment that hints at an entire unseen life. A half-finished sentence, a photograph glimpsed on a table, a memory they refuse to talk about. What makes the character work so effective is how it intertwines with the film's themes of perception and deception. Everyone in Taken in Plain Sight is performing in some way, wearing masks not to deceive others but to protect themselves. The story keeps peeling away these layers, scene by scene, until the characters stand exposed. Raw, human, imperfect. The protagonist's journey, especially, becomes less about solving an external mystery and more about confronting an internal one: who they've become and what they've done to survive. Their transformation is not clean or triumphant but messy and bittersweet, shaped by loss, forgiveness, and a lingering sense of ambiguity. Motivation drives every action, but in this film, motivations are slippery things. A character may claim they want justice, but deep down it's revenge. Another says they want closure, but really, they're chasing redemption. These hidden desires add texture to the story and make every interaction feel like a power play. The dialogue carries double meanings. What's spoken is rarely what's meant. This tension between surface and depth gives the film its emotional electricity. It's not just about what characters do. It's about why they can't stop themselves from doing it. The chemistry between characters also deserves attention. The exchanges are sharp and emotionally loaded, often playing out like miniature duels. A single look can change the direction of a conversation. There's a palpable undercurrent of fear and intimacy, especially between characters who share a buried past. Their dynamic isn't built on exposition but on energy. Pauses, hesitation, the weight of words left unspoken. In one unforgettable scene, two characters sit across from each other, saying almost nothing, and yet the air feels thick with everything they refuse to confess. Even antagonistic figures are given surprising depth. The so-called villain of the story isn't a cartoonish embodiment of evil, but a reflection of the same desperation that drives the hero. Their decisions, however cruel or misguided, stem from pain and survival rather than pure malice. The film draws parallels between them and the protagonist, blurring the line between right and wrong. By the time their paths collide, you understand that both are driven by the same primal need: to protect, to reclaim, to be seen. One of the most compelling aspects of the character development is how each person's arc influences the others. Growth doesn't happen in isolation. When one character breaks down, another hardens. When one confesses, another retreats deeper into silence. The emotional balance shifts constantly, giving the story a sense of fluidity. It feels like a web of interconnected fates rather than a series of individual stories. Every decision echoes outward, touching everyone involved. Throughout the film, transformation is subtle but profound. Some characters gain courage they didn't know they had. Others lose the illusions they depended on. A few discover truths too heavy to bear. The beauty lies in the restraint, the way change is portrayed not through grand speeches but through quiet moments. A character who once avoided eye contact now meets a gaze head-on. Someone who used to walk away stays. Someone who once lied finally tells the truth, even when it costs them everything. These are the small, human victories that give the story its emotional pulse. In Taken in Plain Sight, character development isn't a side note, it's the story itself. Every twist in the plot feels earned because it grows directly from human emotion, from the ways people love, fear, and protect one another. The characters shape the narrative's rhythm, giving it weight and authenticity. Their evolution mirrors the film's central idea, that what's hidden beneath the surface, guilt, love, regret, resilience, is far more compelling than what's visible in plain sight. The performances in Taken in Plain Sight 2024 are the kind that don't just fill the screen, they inhabit it. Every actor seems to understand that the film's power lies not in loud emotions but in what's quietly restrained. The cast moves like a carefully tuned orchestra, each performer contributing a note that builds into a larger, haunting symphony of human behavior. There's no sense of performance for show here. Instead, the acting feels lived in, as if the camera has simply wandered into the middle of real lives unraveling. The lead delivers a performance of startling intimacy. They begin as someone quietly composed, almost invisible in their own world, but as the story deepens, so does their expression. Their face becomes a map of internal turmoil, subtle changes in breath, the way their eyes dart before deciding to lie, the tremor in their voice when fear overrides logic. It's the kind of performance that doesn't beg for attention but earns it with precision. Watching them unravel emotionally is mesmerizing because it never feels theatrical. It feels human. They manage to balance vulnerability and strength, fear and defiance, making the audience believe every hesitation and every decision. By the midpoint, when the truth starts to surface, you can see years of guilt, confusion, and exhaustion flicker across their face without a single word spoken. The supporting cast amplifies that authenticity. The actor playing the investigator deserves special mention, a performance steeped in quiet intensity. They bring to the screen a mixture of empathy and authority, always walking the line between compassion and control. You can see the weight of experience in their eyes, the exhaustion of someone who's seen too many lies and too few happy endings. Their chemistry with the lead actor creates a fascinating tension, at times adversarial, at times unexpectedly tender. There's a sense that both characters are trapped in the same web, and the performances make that dynamic electric. Another standout comes from the actor portraying the protagonist's friend. the emotional anchor of the story. Their performance is the heartbeat that keeps the film grounded in humanity. They play guilt not as melodrama but as quiet self-destruction. Their every scene carries a sense of history, a weight of things unsaid. When they finally break down, it's devastating precisely because it feels earned. The vulnerability they bring adds texture to the story, reminding the audience that grief doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just lingers in the pauses between words. Even the so-called antagonist is given depth through performance rather than dialogue. This actor refuses to play the villain as a monster. Instead, they build a portrait of someone corroded by pain, convinced that their cruelty is a form of justice. It's chilling because it's believable. They never overplay menace. A simple glance or half-smile is enough to freeze a scene. Their calm delivery, paired with an undercurrent of rage, creates a complex character who commands attention every time they appear. The film thrives on ambiguity, and this performance captures that perfectly. You can't quite hate them, even when you know you should. The ensemble dynamic is one of the film's greatest strengths. Every actor seems aware of the emotional rhythm of the others, and that synchronicity keeps the tension alive. Scenes rarely feel staged. Conversations flow like real exchanges, filled with interruptions, overlapping dialogue, and loaded silences. The filmmakers trust their actors enough to let them breathe inside the scene, to hesitate, to look away, to let the subtext do the talking. This trust pays off in moments that feel raw and unscripted. Small performances from the secondary cast add unexpected richness. The neighbor who always seems to be watching, the parent whose grief comes out as anger, the quiet shopkeeper who knows more than they say. These actors make the world of the film feel lived in. Even a single line delivered with the right inflection adds emotional realism. You sense that everyone in this story carries their own secret, and that comes across because the cast plays their roles as people with full histories, not just background figures. What's especially striking is the film's reliance on nonverbal communication. So much of Taken in Plain Sight depends on what isn't said, and the actors understand this perfectly. A tightening of the jaw, a glance that lingers too long, a hesitation before answering. These small details tell the story as much as the dialogue. The lead's emotional collapse near the end is a masterclass in restraint. They don't sob or shout. They simply stop speaking, their silence heavy with everything they can't admit. It's painful, beautiful, and utterly convincing. There's a palpable chemistry among the cast, not romantic but emotional, a sense of shared burden. You can feel that these characters have known each other for years, that they've hurt and forgiven each other countless times before the events of the film even begin. That lived-in familiarity gives the story its texture. Even when characters are at odds, there's history in their tension, and the actors carry that history with remarkable precision. What truly elevates the performances is how naturally the emotions evolve. No one suddenly becomes brave, terrified, or broken. Instead, these shifts unfold gradually, like the slow fading of light at dusk. The actors capture that progression with honesty. Their transformations mirror the film's themes: the slow erosion of certainty, the fragility of perception, the way truth reshapes identity. Each performer seems to understand the weight of the film's title, that what's hidden in plain sight isn't always the secret itself, but the emotions people try to bury. By blending subtlety, intensity, and restraint, the cast of Taken in Plain Sight 2024 turns what could have been a simple mystery into a deeply human drama. Their performances don't just tell the story, they become it. Every glance, hesitation, and crack in their voices pulls the audience closer, making you feel less like you're watching a film and more like you're witnessing lives quietly falling apart before your eyes. The direction in Taken in Plain Sight 2024 is the invisible hand that guides every emotion, every shadow, and every heartbeat of the story. From the first scene, you can tell the director isn't interested in showing off. They're interested in control. The tone is built with precision, like an artist layering shades on a canvas until the picture feels both intimate and unsettling. The film never rushes to grab your attention. It earns it through patience, rhythm, and a deep understanding of tension. The director shapes the world of Taken in Plain Sight not as a traditional thriller but as a psychological labyrinth, where what's left unsaid often speaks louder than dialogue. The mood is carefully engineered through contrast. On the surface, everything looks calm. Sunlit streets, quiet homes, familiar routines. But the director uses this normality as a mask for danger. The pacing mirrors that deception. It begins slow, almost deceptively still, allowing the audience to settle into the illusion of safety. Then, almost imperceptibly, the tempo shifts. Scenes start to overlap, conversations shorten. Silences stretch longer than they should. Without realizing it, you've moved from observation to participation. You're no longer watching the story, you're caught inside it. The director plays with tension the way a composer manipulates music, building crescendos out of stillness, cutting to silence when you expect sound. One of the most striking aspects of the direction is its use of visual storytelling. The camera isn't just a witness. It's a character. It lingers on details most directors would overlook. The flicker of a hallway light, a reflection caught in a car window, a door slightly ajar. Every shot feels intentional, as though the camera knows something the characters don't. The framing often isolates individuals within the composition, surrounding them with negative space to highlight their emotional distance or entrapment. It's a subtle but powerful technique that reinforces the film's themes of visibility and concealment. The director understands that what's hidden in plain sight isn't always a person. Sometimes it's truth itself. Lighting is another tool wielded with remarkable restraint. Instead of relying on stark contrasts, the director prefers natural tones that gradually decay as the story progresses. Early scenes glow with soft daylight, but by the second act, the palette cools, colors desaturate, and shadows deepen. You can literally feel the world losing warmth as secrets come to light. In a film like this, mood is half the story, and the director paints it in silence, shadow, and suggestion. The pacing is one of the film's boldest choices. The director refuses to bow to conventional thriller rhythms. No sudden bursts of action to release the tension. Instead, the suspense is slow-cooked. Each scene is allowed to breathe, and that breathing space becomes part of the anxiety. You wait for something to happen, and when it finally does, it feels both shocking and inevitable. The transitions between scenes are fluid but deliberate, often blurring the line between present and memory. The editing style complements this perfectly, creating a seamless flow that mirrors the instability of the characters' minds. Time feels elastic here, bending around emotion rather than chronology. The director's vision thrives on ambiguity. Rather than explaining everything, they trust the audience to assemble meaning from fragments. This decision transforms even the quietest moments into puzzles. A lingering shot of a character staring at nothing suddenly feels heavy with implication. A brief touch between two people becomes an entire conversation. By avoiding overt exposition, the director creates a viewing experience that demands attention. You can't look away for fear of missing something crucial, and that's exactly how they want you to feel. Sound design is treated as part of the direction itself. The absence of music in key scenes is as deliberate as its presence elsewhere. Instead of drowning moments in dramatic score, the director often lets the environment speak. A creaking floorboard, distant thunder, the buzz of a flickering light. When music does arrive, it's carefully measured. Low, pulsing tones that seem to come from somewhere inside the walls rather than an orchestra pit. This restraint keeps you on edge, reinforcing the idea that danger lives in the ordinary. The director's handling of performances also deserves attention. They clearly know how to draw honesty out of their actors. Nothing feels forced or overly performed. The dialogue is understated, but the pauses, the hesitations between words, are rich with tension. The director encourages stillness, trusting that the smallest gestures can carry the biggest emotions. You can sense the collaboration behind the camera, an understanding between director and cast that this isn't a film about spectacle, but about revelation. Stylistically, Taken in Plain Sight blends realism with subtle expressionism. The director uses practical locations to root the story in authenticity, but the framing and movement often feel dreamlike, even claustrophobic. The world looks familiar but slightly off. Rooms seem too quiet, hallways too long, faces too close. That unease is deliberate, a reflection of how the protagonist's reality starts to distort. The director turns ordinary spaces into psychological traps, and that visual strategy elevates the entire experience. Even transitions between scenes are carefully choreographed. Instead of traditional cuts, the director often overlaps sound or image, a fragment of dialogue bleeding into the next moment, or a reflection continuing the shot after the subject has moved out of frame. It creates a seamless sense of continuity, as though the story itself refuses to let go. This technique enhances the idea that every event, every decision, every lie is connected. Nothing in this film stands alone. What's most impressive is the director's command over emotional pacing. They know exactly when to hold back and when to release. A sequence that begins in stillness can erupt into confrontation without warning, yet it never feels manipulative. You feel the build-up, the inevitability. The tension is not external but internal, a slow tightening of invisible threads that finally snap in the most unexpected places. The director also uses repetition to great effect. Certain images return, a reflection, a specific location, a recurring sound, each time slightly altered, carrying new emotional weight. This creates a rhythm that mimics memory, as if the film itself is haunted by its own past. The repetition builds meaning, reinforcing the cyclical nature of guilt and denial that defines the characters' journeys. Ultimately, what defines the direction of Taken in Plain Sight is its control. Every frame, every silence, every hesitation feels deliberate. The film isn't directed for easy thrills, it's directed for immersion, that rare kind where you stop noticing the filmmaking altogether and instead feel completely absorbed in its atmosphere. The director's command is subtle, not showy, but unmistakably confident. They construct the film like a slow descent, not a fall, but a drift into deeper layers of emotion and truth. You don't realize how far you've gone until you're surrounded by it. Each creative choice serves a purpose: to blur the boundary between what is visible and what is hidden, what is remembered and what is imagined. The cinematography of Taken in Plain Sight 2024 doesn't just capture the story, it breathes it. Every frame feels alive, calculated, and quietly haunting. The camera doesn't simply record events. It translates emotion into image. There's a deliberate intimacy in how scenes are composed, a sense that the lens itself is intruding on moments too private to witness. The cinematographer uses angles, movement, and light like a language, speaking directly to the audience in a way that words never could. It's not about beauty in the traditional sense. It's about precision, control, and the quiet poetry of fear. The camera angles are a study in perspective, both literally and psychologically. Low angles are rarely used, giving the viewer no sense of dominance or power. Instead, most shots hover just above eye level, placing the audience in a position of quiet observation, as if they're standing unnoticed in the corner of each scene. The effect is unsettling, almost voyeuristic, perfectly aligning with the film's theme of secrets hiding in plain view. When the camera does shift, tilting slightly or framing a character from behind a doorframe or through a window, it's not a stylistic flourish, it's a clue. It suggests watching, surveillance, the uneasy awareness that someone or something is always observing. Lighting in this film is its own form of storytelling. The cinematographer doesn't rely on obvious contrasts of light and dark. Instead, the lighting evolves as the story unravels. In the beginning, the light is soft, natural, and deceptively calm. Daylight filtering through kitchen windows, the gentle warmth of late afternoon sun. As tension creeps in, that warmth begins to fade. Colors cool. Shadows start to stretch across faces. The cinematography subtly mirrors the emotional deterioration of the characters. What begins as comfort turns into confinement. What once looked ordinary now feels ominous. There's a remarkable use of natural light throughout, especially in how it interacts with enclosed spaces. Sunlight doesn't illuminate. It exposes. It falls unevenly, creating strange, fractured patterns that feel almost accusatory. When night falls, the film becomes a symphony of half-light, dim lamps, reflected glows, the harsh white of headlights slicing through the dark. The cinematographer never lets you rest in complete clarity. There's always an edge of obscurity, a reminder that not everything is visible. This play between illumination and shadow becomes the visual heartbeat of the film. Framing is equally meticulous. Characters are often placed off-center, surrounded by negative space, reinforcing the emotional distance and disconnection at the heart of the story. Conversations are framed not with perfect symmetry but with tension, one character partially cut off, another seen only in reflection. The camera finds meaning in absence. You begin to notice what isn't in the frame just as much as what is. That compositional imbalance makes even static shots feel uneasy, as if something could intrude at any moment. The cinematographer turns empty space into a visual metaphor for silence, guilt, and the unseen forces pressing in on the characters. Some of the most striking moments come from how the camera moves or doesn't. When the story tightens, the cinematography slows down. Long, unbroken takes follow characters through corridors or rooms, allowing the tension to build naturally. The camera glides rather than cuts, trapping you within the moment. These shots feel almost suffocating in their stillness, amplifying every sound, every flicker of movement. And when the camera finally does move quickly, a sudden pull back, a sharp turn, a jarring zoom, it lands like a physical jolt. The contrast between motion and stillness becomes a rhythm of its own, dictating how the viewer breathes with the story. Reflections play a recurring role, used with symbolic precision. Mirrors, windows, and even glossy surfaces serve as visual traps, showing fragmented identities, dual realities, and unspoken truths. The cinematographer uses them not as decoration, but as portals. In several key scenes, characters are seen through reflections rather than directly, emphasizing how perception itself becomes unreliable. You're constantly questioning whether what you see is truth or distortion. This layered approach to imagery reinforces the film's central theme of concealment and revelation. Color grading also contributes profoundly to the storytelling. The palette shifts subtly across acts, from muted earth tones and sunlit warmth to colder blues and sterile grays. The transition isn't abrupt but gradual, a slow draining of color that parallels the emotional unraveling of the narrative. By the final act, the film's world looks almost bleached of life, as if the story itself has been stripped down to its raw truth. The desaturation feels less like an aesthetic choice and more like an emotional consequence. One of the most unforgettable visual sequences comes midway through the film, a confrontation shot in near darkness, lit only by a single swinging bulb. The camera doesn't flinch or move. It just watches as the light oscillates, revealing faces in flashes, concealing them in shadow. It's hypnotic, terrifying, and breathtakingly simple. The cinematographer understands that suggestion is more powerful than exposure, that the imagination fills darkness with far more dread than any image could show. Even exterior shots carry emotional weight. Wide landscapes are rare, and when they appear, they feel desolate rather than freeing. The cinematographer uses open spaces not to offer relief, but to heighten isolation. A character standing alone against a horizon feels smaller, more fragile, as if swallowed by the emptiness around them. It's a reminder that the film's true confinement isn't physical, but psychological. Depth of field is used with similar emotional precision. Shallow focus isolates subjects from their surroundings, trapping them in their own private frames, while deep focus occasionally reminds us of the world still spinning indifferently beyond their struggles. The constant shifting of focus reflects the instability of truth. What's sharp in one moment blurs in the next, mirroring the uncertainty of memory and perception that drives the story forward. The cinematographer's restraint is what gives Taken in Plain Sight its visual power. There's no indulgence, no unnecessary spectacle. Every shot feels earned, every choice purposeful. The atmosphere is built not through grandeur but through subtlety. The way light touches skin, the way shadows creep along walls, the way the camera seems to hesitate before cutting away. The visuals never dominate the narrative. They enhance it, shaping how we feel without ever telling us what to think. By the end, the cinematography has transformed from observation into participation. The viewer becomes complicit in the act of watching, aware of their own gaze, questioning what they've seen and what they've missed. The film's visual language leaves behind not just images, but impressions. Of faces half lit, of truths half told, of moments that feel too real to be fiction. It's cinematography that doesn't just show a story, but etches it into your memory. The editing and pacing of Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, are the invisible engines that drive its suspense, emotion, and sense of unease. This is the kind of film where editing doesn't call attention to itself, yet it shapes every beat of the story's rhythm. You don't notice the cuts, you feel them. The transitions are deliberate, patient, and surgical, each one designed not just to move the story forward but to manipulate time, memory, and tension. There's a craftsmanship to the way scenes are assembled, a deep understanding that the real power of pacing lies in how long a moment is allowed to breathe before it's interrupted. The film begins with a rhythm that feels almost deceptively calm. The editor uses longer takes, unhurried cuts, and lingering dissolves that let the audience settle into the world. It's the cinematic equivalent of steady breathing before the anxiety sets in. Conversations are allowed to unfold naturally, with pauses and silences intact. The editing trusts the actors' performances, never rushing through dialogue to get to the next plot point. This restraint creates a false sense of security, a rhythm so calm that when the tension begins to rise, you feel it instantly in your body. The film teaches you how to watch it, then begins to disrupt that pattern piece by piece. As the story deepens and the mystery tightens, the pacing shifts almost imperceptibly. Cuts become shorter, transitions sharper. The once fluid editing begins to fracture slightly, mirroring the protagonist's unraveling state of mind. Quick flashes, overlapping dialogue, and sudden cuts to silence create an emotional jolt. The editing mirrors thought itself, scattered, reactive, haunted by images that won't leave. These moments aren't chaotic. They're controlled disorientation. Every abrupt cut lands with purpose, leaving traces of what's been omitted for the audience to piece together. One of the most effective techniques the film uses is rhythmic contrast. Slow scenes are followed by rapid montages, not for shock value but to reset the audience's pulse. The editor understands that pacing isn't about speed, it's about control. Some scenes last just long enough to become uncomfortable, others end a beat too soon, creating a lingering tension that carries into the next sequence. This fluctuation keeps viewers alert, emotionally invested, and slightly off balance. It's the cinematic version of holding your breath without realizing it. Transitions between past and present, memory and reality, are handled with remarkable fluidity. The editing never telegraphs when a flashback is coming. It simply slides into it, often using sound or movement as the bridge. A door closing in one timeline becomes a door opening in another. A spoken line continues across a cut, connecting two moments separated by years. This seamless temporal blending turns the narrative into a living memory, fragmented but coherent, unsettlingly real. It's a subtle but powerful way of showing that time itself is unstable within the film's psychological landscape. The pacing also benefits from the editor's mastery of silence. Instead of filling every second with score or dialogue, the film knows when to let quiet moments stretch. These pauses allow emotion to resonate. A glance, a breath, a small hesitation can carry the weight of an entire scene. The choice to linger, to not cut away, becomes an act of storytelling. The audience is forced to sit in discomfort, to feel what the characters are feeling. It's a slow-burn approach that rewards patience and amplifies impact. When the tension finally erupts, the editing transforms completely. Cuts become jagged, movements disorienting, time itself begins to feel fractured. But even in its most chaotic sequences, the film never loses spatial or emotional clarity. You always know where you are and, more importantly, why you're there. The editor manages to sustain urgency without sacrificing coherence, a delicate balance that keeps the audience engaged without overwhelming them. The pacing tightens to the point of claustrophobia, but the emotion remains intact, ensuring that every burst of action or confrontation lands with genuine weight. The rhythm of the film often mirrors heartbeat patterns, slow build-ups followed by sharp, pulsing spikes of intensity. The editor plays with tempo like a composer, orchestrating emotion through timing alone. A cut that arrives a fraction of a second earlier or later completely alters the feeling of a scene. That level of precision is what gives Taken in Plain Sight its hypnotic grip. You're not just watching the story unfold, you're feeling its pulse. Montage sequences are used sparingly but effectively. Instead of traditional expositional montages, they function as emotional collages. Fragments of memory, flashes of imagery, and sound layered together to convey psychological collapse or recollection. The editing becomes expressionistic, translating inner turmoil into rhythm and texture. These sequences often end abruptly, returning to stillness with unnerving suddenness. The contrast between movement and stillness becomes its own kind of storytelling. In quieter sections, the pacing slows again, but it never loses momentum. The editor finds flow even in stillness, maintaining a steady forward motion through visual continuity and emotional momentum. Cuts are motivated not by plot necessity but by emotional logic. The camera shifts when the feeling shifts, not when the script dictates it. This kind of editing creates an organic rhythm that mirrors the way people actually process moments in real life. As the film nears its climax, the pacing compresses time without feeling rushed. The tension tightens like a coil. Scenes overlap. Sound bridges connect emotional beats across different locations. The editing becomes invisible again, serving the emotional truth of the story rather than the mechanics of plot resolution. Each transition feels inevitable, as though the film has been building to this precise rhythm all along. What's most impressive is the restraint. In an age of hypercut thrillers and overstimulated pacing, Taken in Plain Sight proves that the most powerful editing is the kind you don't notice, the kind that manipulates emotion through rhythm, not speed. It's the confidence to hold a shot until it becomes unbearable, the instinct to cut just before relief arrives. The film's editor understands that tension isn't about chaos, it's about timing. Every frame, every transition, every silence is part of a meticulously composed rhythm that shapes how the audience experiences fear, empathy, and revelation. By the time the credits roll, you realize that the film's pacing has guided you through the story like a pulse. Steady, accelerating, faltering, then quieting. It has carried you through dread, release, and reflection without ever losing control. The editing is the unseen hand that keeps the entire film in balance, maintaining engagement not through spectacle, but through rhythm, through the careful dance between motion and stillness, between what is revealed and what is withheld. The soundtrack and score of Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, operate like an unseen character, never intrusive, yet always present, shaping emotion, rhythm, and atmosphere with invisible precision. This is not a film that leans on its music for cheap intensity. Instead, the score seeps into the story like mist, subtle and slow, enhancing mood rather than dictating it. It doesn't tell you how to feel. It lets you arrive there on your own, but with just enough guidance to make every emotional beat hit with unnerving precision. The composer approaches the film with the restraint of someone who knows silence can sometimes be louder than sound, using music not as decoration but as psychological texture. From the opening frame, the sound design feels organic, almost deceptively gentle. The first musical notes are barely there, a low hum, a trembling tone that might even be mistaken for background noise. It's the kind of sound you don't notice until it stops. This minimalist opening establishes the score's philosophy: tension through absence. The composer uses space as rhythm, allowing the audience to lean in, to feel the quiet unease that fills every pause. When melody does emerge, it's fragile: sparse piano keys, an isolated violin, a distant drone. Each element feels intentionally incomplete, mirroring the film's themes of missing pieces and fractured truth. The recurring motifs in the score are built on repetition and distortion. A simple three-note pattern appears early on, soft and almost comforting, only to resurface later warped and slowed, stripped of warmth. It's the musical embodiment of memory, familiar but corrupted by time and trauma. The composer plays with this motif throughout the film, letting it appear in different instruments, different registers, sometimes hidden beneath ambient noise. It becomes the story's subconscious heartbeat, echoing in scenes where the characters themselves can't find the words to express their fear or guilt. The soundscape of the film is as much about texture as it is about melody. The composer incorporates environmental sounds, the hum of fluorescent lights, the faint buzz of power lines, the creak of wood, the echo of footsteps, blending them seamlessly into the score. Sometimes it's hard to tell where music ends and ambient noise begins. This blending makes the world of Taken in plain sight feel alive, uneasy, and inescapably real. Every sound feels charged with emotional energy, even when nothing overtly musical is happening. When the film shifts into moments of suspense or revelation, the music doesn't explode. It contracts. The score pulls inward, lowering its volume, narrowing its range, creating an almost suffocating sense of closeness. This inversion of expectation, where quiet becomes intensity, is what makes the music so effective. The composer understands that fear doesn't come from loud crescendos but from stillness, from the anticipation that something might happen. A single sustained note can hold more power than an entire orchestra if it's used at the right moment, and this score proves that again and again. There are standout compositions, though not in the traditional sense. One particularly memorable sequence features a haunting vocal texture, not lyrics, just human breath and tone, woven into the instrumental fabric. It doesn't sound like a song, but rather like the memory of one, distant and half-forgotten. The use of the human voice as an instrument adds a ghostly intimacy to the film, reminding the viewer that even within the coldness of mystery, there's a human heartbeat. Another highlight comes in the film's midpoint, where a subtle rhythmic pulse begins to underlie the scenes, a barely audible thrum that syncs with the pacing of the editing, guiding the viewer's heartbeat to match the film's emotional tempo. Silence, too, plays a starring role. The composer and sound designer clearly worked hand in hand to give silence narrative meaning. It's never just the absence of music. It's an active choice, a charged space where emotion expands. The film knows exactly when to strip the sound away. In one crucial scene, the score disappears completely, leaving only the natural sounds of the environment. A ticking clock, a rustle of fabric, distant breathing. The lack of music forces the audience to focus, to fill the void with their own tension. When the score finally re-enters, it doesn't soothe. It cuts like cold air, a reminder that calmness in this story is never safety. As the narrative darkens, the music evolves in tandem. The tones grow deeper, the harmonies more dissonant, the once delicate motifs now fractured into uneasy patterns. There's a sense of decay built into the composition. Each cue seems to echo the emotional erosion of the characters. Yet, in its most emotional moments, the score pulls back again, returning to simplicity. Just a single piano note repeating, almost hesitant, as if the music itself is trying to remember something that's been lost. The film's climax uses music with stunning precision. Instead of rising into a dramatic crescendo, it opts for restraint. The score hums like an undercurrent, low frequencies, trembling strings, a soft rhythmic pulse that feels like a heartbeat struggling to stay steady. The tension doesn't come from the music's volume, but from its fragility. The sound feels like it could break at any moment, and that fragility perfectly mirrors the emotional collapse of the characters on screen. By the time the film reaches its final scenes, the score circles back to its original motif, now stripped bare. The familiar notes return, slower, quieter, tinged with melancholy. The transformation of that simple musical phrase mirrors the story's emotional arc. What began as innocence now carries the weight of experience. It's a subtle but devastating musical payoff that resonates long after the last note fades. Throughout Taken in Plain Sight, the soundtrack is inseparable from the story's psychological landscape. The composer doesn't rely on grand orchestration or catchy themes. Instead, they build atmosphere through restraint, using repetition, distortion, and silence as emotional tools. The score never overpowers the film. It merges with it, breathing in sync with the narrative's pacing and tone. Every sound, from the faintest hum to the quietest piano key, is part of a larger emotional architecture designed to keep the audience suspended between empathy and unease. It's music that doesn't want to be noticed. yet once you hear it, you can't forget it. It lingers like memory, half heard, half felt, the echo of everything the characters tried to hide and everything they couldn't escape. Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, operates on multiple layers of meaning, weaving its mystery and emotional depth into a tapestry of psychological, moral, and social commentary. The surface of the story is a gripping drama about disappearance, trust, and truth. But beneath that surface lies a meditation on human blindness, moral complicity, and the quiet tragedies that unfold in plain sight every day. The film doesn't rely on dialogue-heavy exposition or overt moralizing. Instead, it reveals its messages through tone, framing, silence, and behavior. Each scene feels loaded with implication, as if the story is daring the audience to notice what the characters cannot. Thematically, this is a film about seeing and all the ways we fail to. The first and perhaps most dominant theme is the illusion of normalcy. From the opening scenes, the film constructs a world of suburban comfort and routine, where everything appears perfectly ordinary. Neatly mowed lawns, friendly neighbors, polite conversations. These small details form the facade of safety that the film meticulously builds before cracking it open. The idea is that evil, danger, and deception rarely arrive dramatically. They grow slowly, quietly, behind the curtains of what seems familiar. This tension between appearance and reality fuels the story's unease. The audience, like the characters, is lulled into a false sense of security before realizing how much they've missed. It's a haunting commentary on how people convince themselves that everything's fine because the alternative, admitting something is wrong, would mean facing chaos. Running parallel to that is the theme of collective denial and moral blindness. The film explores how communities often choose ignorance over confrontation. When someone disappears, when something doesn't add up, the instinct isn't to dig deeper but to look away, to rationalize. There's a discomfort in acknowledging darkness within the familiar, and the film exploits that discomfort to chilling effect. Neighbors exchange sympathetic glances but avoid real questions. Friends deflect suspicion with polite concern. The story becomes a study of social complicity, how silence protects both the guilty and the fearful. This theme lands hardest in scenes where people reassure themselves with platitudes, even as unease simmers beneath. The film seems to whisper that apathy is its own form of violence, that by refusing to see, we become part of the lie. Then there's the fragility of perception, which the film handles with precision. Every major event is filtered through limited viewpoints, reminding us that seeing something doesn't mean understanding it. Memories shift, motives blur, and certainty becomes impossible. This narrative design reinforces the idea that truth isn't a single revelation but a spectrum of interpretations. The story plays with ambiguity in a way that mirrors human psychology. Our minds edit what we can't process, smooth over contradictions, and create coherence where there may be none. The result is a world where everyone believes their version of events, even when those versions are irreconcilable. This idea is beautifully mirrored in the cinematography, which often frames characters through reflections, glass, or partial obstructions, a literal visualization of selective vision. A deeply personal theme emerges through trust and emotional dependence. Relationships in Taken in Plain Sight are not built on love alone. They are built on power dynamics, unspoken debts, and fragile negotiations. The film examines how affection and manipulation can coexist, how people surrender their autonomy not out of fear but out of a desire to belong. Trust becomes currency, something to be earned, traded, and ultimately betrayed. This emotional tension gives the story its haunting realism. The characters cling to relationships that harm them because the alternative, being alone with the truth, feels unbearable. In this way, the film explores how vulnerability can be exploited, not through overt coercion, but through intimacy itself. Another powerful undercurrent is gender and societal silence. The film never declares itself a feminist statement, yet its treatment of female experience feels uncomfortably authentic. Women in the story are the first to notice when something feels wrong, yet they're often dismissed, patronized, or told they're overreacting. Their intuition is treated as hysteria. Their discomfort is explained away by those around them. This dynamic becomes a quiet indictment of how society polices women's credibility, how gaslighting is normalized in subtle ways. The film's power lies in its restraint. It doesn't stage dramatic confrontations but allows the quiet disbelief, the sidelong glances, the dismissive tones to speak volumes. It's a slow, psychological unmasking of how patriarchal systems sustain themselves not through overt oppression, but through disbelief disguised as civility. Memory and trauma also take center stage, with the film exploring how people rewrite their own histories to survive. Flashbacks are fragmented, unreliable, colored by guilt and repression. What's remembered is less important than how it's remembered. The story understands that trauma is not a single event but a living wound that reshapes memory over time. Characters try to bury their pasts, only to find the past rewriting the present. Thematically, this blurs the boundary between remembering and imagining, truth and self-protection. It's a deeply empathetic portrayal of how the human mind bends reality to stay intact. The film also engages with power, both systemic and psychological. Authority figures are portrayed not as villains, but as people who misuse power under the guise of benevolence. A teacher, a parent, a community leader, all become instruments of control in different ways. This ambiguity forces the audience to question where protection ends and domination begins. Control here isn't achieved through threats or violence but through emotional manipulation, social standing, and the implicit trust people place in familiar hierarchies. The brilliance of this theme is its subtlety. By the time viewers realize who holds power and who's trapped by it, it's already too late for the characters themselves. One of the film's most haunting ideas is the cost of awareness. Knowledge, taken in plain sight, is not freedom, it's punishment. When the truth finally surfaces, it doesn't restore peace. It shatters what little stability remains. The story treats understanding as a double-edged sword. To see clearly is to lose innocence, comfort, and community. This philosophical undertone adds weight to the narrative's emotional arc, making it not just a thriller but a moral reckoning. The camera often mirrors this idea. Light pierces through darkness at key moments, but it's harsh, exposing, unkind. Illumination doesn't soothe. It burns. Finally, there's a quiet thread of redemption and reckoning that runs beneath everything. The film doesn't present redemption as heroic or dramatic. Instead, it treats it as a quiet, painful acknowledgement, the moment when a character finally stops looking away. These realizations don't resolve the story neatly, but they offer emotional truth. The characters may not find justice, but they find clarity, and that feels more powerful. The film seems to suggest that redemption isn't about undoing the past, but about finally seeing it for what it was. What makes Taken in Plain Sight so thematically rich is how seamlessly these layers intertwine. No theme exists in isolation. The visual effects and CGI in Taken in Plain Sight 2024 operate like a stealthy collaborator rather than a flashy guest star. They're rarely calling attention to themselves, and that's precisely the point. The film uses VFX sparingly and with a purpose, reinforcing mood and psychological distortion instead of delivering spectacle. Most of the effects work lives at the margins. Subtle enhancements to lighting, gentle digital cleaning to extend a set or erase modern artifacts, and delicate compositing that places characters into frames where physical staging would have compromised intimacy. When the narrative requires a moment that skirts the edge of reality, a memory that fractures, a reflection that becomes slightly wrong, or a horizon that seems to tilt, the visual effects step in not to astonish but to suggest. Those moments are effective because they're built from practical foundations. A real location, careful blocking, a physical prop, and then touched up digitally to nudge perception rather than rewrite it. The tactile approach matters here. Practical effects, doors that stick, a swinging bulb on an actual wire, rain machines, handheld practical blood or grime, give texture and weight to the scenes, making the small human details feel convincing. The digital work respects that texture, avoiding the overly smoothed plastic look that would break immersion. In sequences where the filmmaker wants the audience to distrust their eyes, VFX are used to introduce tiny temporal shifts. A blink that lingers, a shadow that lags a fraction, achieved through frame blending and subtle speed ramps rather than obvious CGI tricks. Those calibrated distortions amplify the film's themes of memory and perception without shouting. This is special effects. There are also a few sequences where environmental extension is necessary. Exteriors are lengthened, skyline elements are removed, and background plates are composited to maintain continuity across shots. These are executed with an eye for color and grain, so they sit seamlessly alongside the cinematography's natural light. The film avoids heavy reliance on digital crowds or overtly generated faces, which keeps emotional beats grounded in real human performance. Occasionally a digital effect does show its seams. A late-night composite or a quick body double blend can feel fractionally soft at the edges if you look closely, but those are exceptions rather than the rule, and the editing cleverly masks them through cut timing and sound design. Speaking of sound, the score and ambient noise often carry the burden of making a subtly altered visual feel true. A slightly warped image accompanied by matched audio textures convinces the brain faster than visuals alone. Practical effects also play a vital narrative role. Physical props that age over the course of filming, practical weather elements that force actors into authentic reactions, and in-camera tricks that create reflections or doubled imagery without digital manipulation give many scenes a lived-in authenticity. When the story demands something more overtly surreal, the few dreamlike or memory blend sequences, the team leans into layered compositing, texture mapping, and analog-style film grain overlays to ensure the surreal looks like a subjective, internal event rather than a production flourish. Overall, the effects philosophy reads as minimalist and intentional. Enhance the story where necessary, preserve the actor's presence, and let the film's mood do the heavy lifting. The balance between practical and digital is weighted toward physical execution, with CGI as a careful second voice that whispers corrections and distortions rather than shouting transformations, which keeps the viewer inside the emotional logic of the film rather than outside admiring craft. The world of Taken in Plain Sight feels lived in down to the smallest details, as if the production design team quietly scribbled backstories on every surface and left them for the camera to discover. The homes, storefronts, and municipal spaces are not generic film sets but personalized habitats that reveal character without a single line of dialogue. A chipped mug in the protagonist's kitchen hints at routines interrupted. A child's drawing pinned behind a refrigerator magnet reads like a private testimony. And the accumulation of mail in a hallway drawer tells a story of procrastination and distraction long before anyone mentions it. Locations are chosen with thematic purpose. Suburban cul-de-sacs that look comforting on approach but, once inside the frame, are shot to feel claustrophobic, with fences and hedges becoming visual barriers rather than quaint boundaries. A community center meant to be a hub appears sterile and institutionally beige, its fluorescent lights flattening warmth and subtly underscoring the film's idea of sameness hiding strain. Production design leans heavily on textures. Scuffed wooden floors that keep time, threadbare upholstery that suggests history and economic realities, and kitchen tiles with faint, hard-to-notice cracks mirroring emotional fissures, while props are used not as mere set dressing but as narrative anchors. A calendar with dates crossed out, a recorder with a missing button, a forgotten jacket in the wrong season. Each object repurposed as a clue or emotional accelerant. The film makes smart use of transitional spaces, stairwells, vestibules, porches, as psychological thresholds where characters' masks slip. These liminal locations are dressed minimally but memorably, with coat racks, fading doormats, and peeling paint that visually signal wear and the passage of small, devastating choices. Public places are convincing in their mundanity. A diner's menu board shows local prices and ads that root the story in a specific socio-economic world. A police station's evidence room is cluttered and bureaucratic, and the local library's cramped back office becomes unexpectedly sinister because it's so ordinary. Exterior locations are framed to play with scale and perception. Wide, empty fields make isolation feel like exposure, while narrow alleys and closely parked cars compress space to emphasize entrapment. And the design team cleverly uses weather and time of day to shift these spaces' emotional valences, so the same street can look benign in morning light and menacing under sodium lamps at night. Color palettes in sets are intentionally muted. Soft grays, faded blues, dirty whites, and occasional sickly yellows that age the world and keep attention on faces, while small pops of color, a red scarf, a child's bright toy, a neon shop sign, act as visual punctuation, drawing the eye for a beat and then letting unease settle back in. Attention to detail extends into believable wear and function. cupboards that stick, bathroom mirrors with one corner missing, phone chargers tangled in drawers, each quirk giving actors something tactile to interact with and the camera something truthful to linger on. The production design also supports the film's motif of visibility versus concealment through layered sets. Rooms with half-closed curtains, windows with smeared glass, deliberate placement of reflective surfaces so scenes can be observed indirectly. These choices allow the cinematography to play with frames within frames and make the environment a storytelling device in its own right. Even when the story requires a more stylized or memory-like space, the team grounds it with tactile elements. A memory sequence might bloom with saturated wallpaper or anachronistic knickknacks, but those details are worn and specific, preventing the surreal from feeling decorative. Practical set building is used to enhance performances. Tight-built interiors force actors into intimate blocking, while well-realized exteriors allow for long camera takes that build tension without visible seams. The production's logistical choices are also narratively smart. The reuse of certain locations in new contexts, the same hallway becoming a different emotional site depending on who occupies it and when, reinforces the film's theme that the familiar can change meaning depending on perspective. Props and set pieces are often staged as narrative echoes. An old photograph appears in multiple places, collecting new significance each time, and a specific piece of furniture becomes a witness to different acts of concealment and confession. Sound and texture are anticipated in the design. Creaky floorboards are left intentionally loose, doors are fitted to give a particular thunk, and surfaces are chosen for how they reflect and deaden sound so that silence itself becomes a designed element. In short, the film's environments don't just host action. They comment on it, trap it, and sometimes betray it. They're visually compelling not through high gloss or spectacle, but through a disciplined, detail-driven realism that turns ordinary objects and everyday spaces into emotional signifiers, layering the narrative with a tactile authenticity that rewards close viewing. The dialogue in Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, feels deceptively simple, but every word seems sharpened at both ends, crafted not for exposition but for tension, rhythm, and revelation. The screenplay operates on a principle of quiet danger. People rarely say what they mean, yet what they don't say lands even harder. The writing captures the kind of small-town speech that sounds casual on the surface but hides entire histories underneath. Characters speak in clipped phrases, half-thoughts, and polite evasions, and it's in these gaps that the film finds its electricity. The best moments are when silence completes the sentence, where a pause becomes heavier than any confession. There's a remarkable confidence in how the script trusts its audience to listen between the lines, to sense meaning in tone rather than in words. The tension in the story doesn't come from raised voices but from measured restraint. Someone asking, "You all right?" can feel more like a threat than an act of kindness. The script avoids the temptation of cinematic overwriting. Instead, it draws its realism from how people actually talk when they're trying not to reveal too much. A conversation about grocery lists can become a coded exchange about fear. A neighbor's small talk can sound like an interrogation. The dialogue is written to feel almost unremarkable, yet when you look closer, every phrase doubles as subtext. This is a film where language becomes camouflage. Everyone hides behind normality, and the brilliance of the script lies in how it lets that camouflage slip just enough to reveal the cracks underneath. The writing understands that the most frightening or heartbreaking words are often the ones that sound perfectly ordinary. There's a rhythm to how conversations unfold that mirrors the film's themes of repression and denial. The writers employ interruptions, stutters, and abrupt topic shifts as emotional cues. People cutting themselves off mid-sentence because they realize what they were about to admit, or because they fear being overheard. The editing of dialogue within scenes preserves this fractured flow, giving every exchange a live-wire unpredictability. You never quite know when someone will drop a truth bomb or retreat into silence. Even simple exchanges have the texture of psychological duels. Characters spar not with insults or declarations but with politeness, irony, or sudden withdrawal. Moments of sharp wit appear not as comic relief but as survival mechanisms. The humor is dry, unspoken, almost defensive, a way for characters to reclaim control in uncomfortable situations. A few recurring phrases function like motifs, taking on new meanings each time they're repeated. When a character says, "Everything's fine," It stops being reassurance and becomes a warning. When another murmurs, "You know how it is," it shifts from friendly shorthand to a chilling acknowledgement of complicity. The script's use of repetition and recontextualization adds psychological depth. Words echo across scenes, growing heavier each time until they collapse under their own weight. The emotional weight of the writing builds slowly through accumulation rather than declaration. The most affecting lines are often the ones delivered off-handedly, without fanfare. A parent admitting they don't remember, a friend saying, "You probably imagined it," or someone whispering, "No one's supposed to know." These are sentences that sound like everyday speech but hit with moral and emotional precision. The dialogue avoids melodrama because it doesn't need it. The pain comes from understatement. You can feel the years of guilt or fear compressed into a single line, and the restraint makes it all the more devastating. What's particularly fascinating about the script is how it uses language as a form of power. Those who speak the most often reveal the least. Control is maintained through conversation, through framing a narrative that others accept. The film's antagonist doesn't rely on threats but on persuasion, tone, and familiarity, the ability to twist a phrase into reassurance. It's a terrifyingly believable portrait of manipulation through language. Meanwhile, those without power struggle to find the words to articulate what's wrong. The film gives voice to that helplessness through halting, fragmented dialogue, capturing the way trauma often leaves people speechless or doubting their own language. In key moments, the screenplay becomes almost poetic, not in flowery metaphor, but in emotional precision. One striking example is a confrontation scene late in the film, where two characters finally stop pretending. There's no shouting, no speeches, just a simple, exhausted exchange of truths delivered with terrifying calm. The power lies in what isn't said, in how both characters choose their words like weapons they no longer have the strength to wield. The script's understanding of emotional minimalism allows performances to breathe, making every word feel like the tip of an iceberg. The screenplay also demonstrates a refined sense of pacing within dialogue scenes. Conversations are structured like small symphonies, opening in quiet, tentative tones, building into emotional crescendos, and then resolving into uncomfortable stillness. You can feel the writer's control over rhythm and cadence, creating a natural ebb and flow that mirrors the film's editing style. Even monologues are rare. When they occur, they feel earned, emerging like emotional eruptions from characters who've been silent too long. The dialogue isn't just about communication, it's about performance. Characters are constantly performing versions of themselves to others, choosing words that maintain appearances. The script uses this performative quality to reflect broader themes of visibility and denial. Everyone is acting normal, and that act becomes part of the horror. Watching conversations unfold feels like watching people tiptoe across emotional landmines, never sure which word might expose them. Every great thriller needs at least one line that lingers, a phrase that encapsulates its entire moral landscape. In Taken in Plain Sight, that line isn't a dramatic confession or a final revelation. It's something quieter, almost mundane, something you could overhear at a grocery store or school pickup, yet once spoken, it transforms the entire story. It's the line that makes you realize that the film's title isn't just about abduction, it's about emotional erasure, about truths buried under ordinary words. The script succeeds because it treats dialogue as tension rather than decoration. Every pause, every repetition, every slip of the tongue contributes to a larger design. The writing feels alive, reactive, human, and chillingly believable. It's the kind of screenplay where you could strip away the visuals and still feel the story's pulse beating through the words alone. The dialogue in Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, feels deceptively simple, but every word seems sharpened at both ends, crafted not for exposition but for tension, rhythm, and revelation. The screenplay operates on a principle of quiet danger. People rarely say what they mean, yet what they don't say lands even harder. The writing captures the kind of small-town speech that sounds casual on the surface but hides entire histories underneath. Characters speak in clipped phrases, half-thoughts, and polite evasions, and it's in these gaps that the film finds its electricity. The best moments are when silence completes the sentence, where a pause becomes heavier than any confession. There's a remarkable confidence in how the script trusts its audience to listen between the lines, to sense meaning in tone rather than in words. The tension in the story doesn't come from raised voices but from measured restraint. Someone asking, "You all right?" can feel more like a threat than an act of kindness. The script avoids the temptation of cinematic overwriting. Instead, it draws its realism from how people actually talk when they're trying not to reveal too much. A conversation about grocery lists can become a coded exchange about fear. A neighbor's small talk can sound like an interrogation. The dialogue is written to feel almost unremarkable, yet when you look closer, every phrase doubles as subtext. This is a film where language becomes camouflage. Everyone hides behind normality, and the brilliance of the script lies in how it lets that camouflage slip just enough to reveal the cracks underneath. The writing understands that the most frightening or heartbreaking words are often the ones that sound perfectly ordinary. There's a rhythm to how conversations unfold that mirrors the film's themes of repression and denial. The writers employ interruptions, stutters, and abrupt topic shifts as emotional cues. People cutting themselves off mid-sentence because they realize what they were about to admit, or because they fear being overheard. The editing of dialogue within scenes preserves this fractured flow, giving every exchange a live-wire unpredictability. You never quite know when someone will drop a truth bomb or retreat into silence. Even simple exchanges have the texture of psychological duels. Characters spar not with insults or declarations but with politeness, irony, or sudden withdrawal. Moments of sharp wit appear not as comic relief but as survival mechanisms. The humor is dry, unspoken, almost defensive, a way for characters to reclaim control in uncomfortable situations. A few recurring phrases function like motifs, taking on new meanings each time they're repeated. When a character says, "Everything's fine," it stops being reassurance and becomes a warning. When another murmurs, "You know how it is," it shifts from friendly shorthand to a chilling acknowledgement of complicity. The script's use of repetition and recontextualization adds psychological depth. Words echo across scenes, growing heavier each time until they collapse under their own weight. The emotional weight of the writing builds slowly through accumulation rather than declaration. The most affecting lines are often the ones delivered off-handedly, without fanfare. A parent admitting they don't remember, a friend saying, "You probably imagined it," or someone whispering, "No one's supposed to know." These are sentences that sound like everyday speech but hit with moral and emotional precision. The dialogue avoids melodrama because it doesn't need it. The pain comes from understatement. You can feel the years of guilt or fear compressed into a single line, and the restraint makes it all the more devastating. What's particularly fascinating about the script is how it uses language as a form of power. Those who speak the most often reveal the least. Control is maintained through conversation, through framing a narrative that others accept. The film's antagonist doesn't rely on threats but on persuasion, tone, and familiarity, the ability to twist a phrase into reassurance. It's a terrifyingly believable portrait of manipulation through language. Meanwhile, those without power struggle to find the words to articulate what's wrong. The film gives voice to that helplessness through halting, fragmented dialogue, capturing the way trauma often leaves people speechless or doubting their own language. In key moments, the screenplay becomes almost poetic, not in flowery metaphor, but in emotional precision. One striking example is a confrontation scene late in the film, where two characters finally stop pretending. There's no shouting, no speeches, just a simple, exhausted exchange of truths delivered with terrifying calm. The power lies in what isn't said, in how both characters choose their words like weapons they no longer have the strength to wield. The script's understanding of emotional minimalism allows performances to breathe, making every word feel like the tip of an iceberg. The screenplay also demonstrates a refined sense of pacing within dialogue scenes. Conversations are structured like small symphonies, opening in quiet, tentative tones, building into emotional crescendos, and then resolving into uncomfortable stillness. You can feel the writer's control over rhythm and cadence, creating a natural ebb and flow that mirrors the film's editing style. Even monologues are rare. When they occur, they feel earned, emerging like emotional eruptions from characters who've been silent too long. The dialogue isn't just about communication, it's about performance. Characters are constantly performing versions of themselves to others, choosing words that maintain appearances. The script uses this performative quality to reflect broader themes of visibility and denial. Everyone is acting normal, and that act becomes part of the horror. Watching conversations unfold feels like watching people tiptoe across emotional landmines, never sure which word might expose them. Every great thriller needs at least one line that lingers, a phrase that encapsulates its entire moral landscape. In Taken in Plain Sight, that line isn't a dramatic confession or a final revelation. It's something quieter, almost mundane, something you could overhear at a grocery store or school pickup, yet once spoken, it transforms the entire story. It's the line that makes you realize that the film's title isn't just about abduction, it's about emotional erasure, about truths buried under ordinary words. Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, plays with its genre like a magician performing with an open hand. It shows you everything, invites you to predict its next move, and then quietly appends your expectations. On paper, it looks like a straightforward psychological thriller or crime drama, but in execution it behaves more like a hybrid. Part mystery, part emotional character study, part social dissection. It borrows the surface grammar of true crime storytelling, the missing person, the whispers of danger, the secrets in a small town, yet it refuses to deliver those beats in the way audiences have been trained to expect. Instead of leaning on chases, jump scares, or the comforting satisfaction of solved puzzles, the film trades adrenaline for unease, spectacle for intimacy, and simplicity for layered ambiguity. It doesn't break the rules of the genre so much as bend them into new shapes until they serve the story's deeper psychological intent. The suspense in the film is constructed not through loud reveals or elaborate twists but through stillness. The camera lingers on a door slightly ajar or a phone vibrating without being answered. These small, ordinary images generate more tension than a dozen chase scenes because they feel real, the kind of unease that comes from familiarity, not fantasy. The pacing deliberately rejects the roller coaster rhythm of most thrillers. Instead, it moves in waves of dread and release, mirroring the emotional cycles of its characters rather than the mechanical beats of a formulaic plot. By doing so, it stretches the thriller genre into something closer to psychological realism, less about who did it and more about why no one saw it happen. What makes the genre execution so fascinating is how the film retools familiar conventions. There's the investigative structure, clues, red herrings, shifting suspicion, but those mechanisms are used less to drive the story forward and more to reveal the emotional deterioration of everyone involved. Each clue exposes not only new information but also new fractures in relationships. This approach flips the genre's purpose. Instead of a mystery that clarifies, we get a mystery that deepens confusion, mirroring how trauma warps memory and perception. The result is a thriller that refuses catharsis, using suspense not as a delivery system for answers but as a mirror for denial and complicity. Even the archetypes feel inverted. The victim isn't a passive symbol of loss but a haunting presence that defines everyone's behavior. The investigator, rather than being the moral compass, becomes another flawed participant in the cycle of silence. The film's so-called villain is disturbingly ordinary, a figure so embedded in the community that confrontation feels impossible. These subversions give the story a lived-in realism, the sense that the horror isn't lurking in shadows but walking in daylight. By reframing its characters, the film critiques the very expectations of its genre, the desire for heroes, villains, and neat resolutions. Where other thrillers use spectacle to maintain energy, Taken in Plain Sight finds propulsion in emotional texture. The drama is domestic, but the stakes feel existential. Conversations replace car chases. Quiet revelations substitute for climactic confrontations. The balance between suspense and drama is achieved through tone rather than action. A family dinner scene can carry as much tension as a police raid because the danger is internal. It's in the glances, the interruptions, the lies told for protection. The film's genius lies in understanding that the heart of suspense isn't about fearing what's outside, but fearing what might finally come out. The film does flirt with moments of action, but when they arrive, they're stripped of glamour. Violence, when it happens, is abrupt, ugly, and grounded in emotion rather than choreography. There are no slow-motion sequences or orchestral build-ups, just the shock of realism. This restraint amplifies the impact. When something finally breaks, it feels earned and irreversible. The contrast between the film's quiet, methodical pacing and its rare bursts of intensity creates a rhythm that keeps viewers alert, waiting for something they can't quite predict. Humor, sparse as it is, appears in fleeting human bursts, not jokes but moments of release. A sarcastic remark, an awkward exchange, a tired sigh. These bits of levity keep the film from collapsing entirely under its tension. The humor isn't used to deflate suspense but to remind us that these people are still living their lives, still trying to function under the weight of what they won't discuss. It's an acknowledgement of absurdity within tragedy, an emotional survival instinct. The script's tonal control allows these moments to exist without undermining the larger darkness. Another clever twist on genre comes from how the film approaches the idea of revelation. Traditional thrillers move toward exposure, the truth revealed, the villain unmasked, the mystery solved. Taken in Plain Sight moves toward concealment. Each answer seems to raise new questions, and by the time the audience reaches what feels like resolution, they realize the real mystery was never about an event, but about the emotional architecture surrounding it. The revelation is psychological, not procedural. This inversion keeps the audience engaged on an intellectual level, decoding motives, reinterpreting scenes, and questioning every assumption they made in earlier acts. Visually, the genre conventions are reinterpreted through tone rather than style. Where most thrillers would emphasize darkness and movement, this film uses stillness and muted light to build its aesthetic tension. The familiar trappings of the genre, the rainy night, the flickering hallway light, the mirror shot, appear, but they're drained of glamour and repurposed into discomfort. The effect is uncanny. We recognize the language of thrillers, but the meaning has changed. The audience can feel the structure of a thriller while experiencing the emotion of a drama, a merging that keeps the film unpredictable even in familiar territory. What really makes Taken in Plain Sight stand out in its genre execution is how it treats suspense as an ethical experience rather than an entertainment device. It doesn't just make you anxious for the characters, it makes you complicit. You find yourself watching, waiting, suspecting, just like the townspeople on screen. That's the film's boldest subversion. It turns the act of viewing into a reflection of the story's moral landscape. The audience becomes part of the problem, watching without intervening, fascinated by tragedy unfolding in plain sight. In its handling of genre, the film walks a fine line between familiarity and innovation, maintaining enough recognizable tropes to orient the viewer while hollowing them out from the inside to reveal new meaning. It's suspense reimagined as empathy, mystery redefined as moral tension, and drama infused with quiet terror. The end result is something that feels hauntingly real, a thriller that breathes, hesitates, and whispers instead of shouting, transforming its genre from formula into feeling. Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, operates as more than a psychological thriller. It's a mirror held up to modern society, forcing audiences to confront the uncomfortable ways silence and complicity allow darkness to thrive in plain view. Beneath its haunting story of disappearance and denial lies a sharp, layered social commentary on how communities choose to look away from the truth when it threatens their sense of normalcy. The film's title becomes a metaphor not only for the literal act of someone being taken, but also for the emotional and moral blindness that lets injustice exist without interference. It transforms a single tragedy into an indictment of collective apathy. The social critique at the heart of the film is subtle but cutting. It examines how social hierarchies, reputation, and power shape what people believe, and more importantly, what they choose not to believe. The setting, a small, close-knit community that prides itself on moral decency, becomes a microcosm of society's broader tendency to protect its image at the expense of truth. Everyone claims to care, to be shocked, to want justice, but the moment that pursuit demands accountability, silence descends. Through quiet conversations, glances, and community gatherings, the film portrays how denial becomes an unspoken social contract. It's not just fear of scandal that keeps people quiet, It's the shared comfort of pretending nothing's wrong. This theme extends into commentary on gender and power, particularly how authority figures and respected members of a community can exploit their positions while being shielded by trust and social standing. The film doesn't lecture about patriarchy or institutional failure, but its story embodies those systems at work. When suspicions arise, the reactions are telling. Victims are doubted, whispers replace action, and moral outrage only appears once it's safe to express. The film captures how victims of abuse are often disbelieved not because evidence is lacking, but because belief itself threatens the social order. In doing so, Taken in Plain Sight doesn't just portray injustice, it portrays the social architecture that sustains it. There's also a powerful undercurrent about the modern culture of performance, the way people curate morality for appearances. Community meetings, social media posts, and even news broadcasts within the story are depicted as performances of virtue rather than acts of empathy. Everyone wants to be seen caring, but few want to risk comfort for truth. This observation resonates deeply in an age of public outrage cycles and online morality, where caring often stops at the hashtag. The film's social critique becomes a quiet mockery of performative concern, exposing how image-driven compassion can be as hollow as silence. Cultural commentary seeps into the film's treatment of truth and media. The story subtly references how information is shaped and distorted by both traditional and digital channels. The media within the film becomes an extension of the town's self-deception, sensationalizing tragedy, simplifying motives, and creating villains and heroes to fit narrative convenience. This mirrors the way real-world stories of crime or disappearance are consumed, not as human tragedies but as entertainment. By incorporating the presence of cameras, reporters, and viral rumors, the film implicates the audience too, suggesting that the viewer's fascination with true crime is part of the same voyeuristic impulse that fuels the on-screen community's denial. The social commentary deepens when examining family dynamics within the film. It doesn't portray the family as an innocent victim of external evil, but as a reflection of broader cultural pressures. The need to maintain respectability, to keep private matters hidden, and to preserve appearances at any cost becomes a microcosm of the entire society's failure. The home becomes a symbol of both safety and secrecy, a place where silence festers because speaking would destroy the illusion of stability. This domestic realism is what makes the film's cultural critique so effective. It doesn't blame systems in the abstract. It shows how they live inside ordinary people. Even religion and morality come under quiet scrutiny. The church scenes, town gatherings, and speeches of moral virtue all carry an air of denial masked as faith. The film portrays how religious or moral institutions can unintentionally reinforce silence by prioritizing forgiveness over justice, or by equating confrontation with sin. It never mocks belief, but it questions the way faith can be manipulated to maintain control and suppress discomfort. This delicate handling of a sensitive topic gives the film an edge. It critiques hypocrisy without disrespecting genuine spirituality. Another striking layer of commentary is how the film addresses memory and truth in the context of trauma. It highlights how communities rewrite events to protect their collective conscience. Over time, facts blur, motives shift, and those who speak up are painted as unstable or vindictive. This rewriting of history becomes its own act of violence, erasing the reality of what happened while pretending to heal. In this sense, Taken in Plain Sight becomes a cultural study of denial itself. How societies remember selectively, how they turn victims into myths, and how forgetting becomes a survival mechanism. The film also resonates as a broader reflection on modern isolation. Despite living in an era of hyperconnectivity, the story shows how disconnected people truly are from one another's pain. Neighbors share walls but not truths. Families share dinners but not emotions. The cultural malaise of disconnection, people living beside tragedy without truly engaging with it, runs through every scene. Technology only widens that emotional distance. Messages are typed but never sent, calls are ignored, and screens become barriers rather than bridges. This isn't just commentary, it's diagnosis. Crucially, none of these themes feel forced or over-explained. The filmmakers understand that the power of commentary lies in resonance, not rhetoric. The political and cultural subtext is embedded naturally in the story's DNA, revealed through character choices and quiet contradictions rather than monologues or slogans. It never pauses to deliver a message. It lets the audience feel it. The social critique arrives not through dialogue, but through silence, guilt, and what's left unsaid. By the end, Taken in Plain Sight becomes a haunting exploration of collective morality in the modern world. It points a finger at no one directly, yet everyone feels accused. Its social and cultural commentary lingers because it doesn't offer answers. It simply exposes the spaces where truth should have been. It's not just about what was taken, but about who kept pretending not to notice. Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, grips its audience not through spectacle but through emotional precision. Every scene feels designed to make viewers shift uncomfortably in their seats, to question what they would do if faced with the same moral choices, and to feel the quiet dread that comes from realizing that evil doesn't always hide in the shadows. It often stands in plain view, smiling. The film doesn't rely on jump scares or melodramatic outbursts to command attention. Instead, it cultivates a creeping sense of unease that grows scene by scene, drawing the audience into a world where truth feels slippery and safety feels like a myth. It's the kind of movie that leaves you clutching the armrest not because of what's happening on screen, but because of what it's making you think about yourself. Emotionally, the film lands like a slow-building storm. It begins with familiar, almost comforting rhythms, a close-knit town, friendly neighbors, the illusion of normalcy. But that calm is deceptive. As the story unfolds, viewers are pulled into a state of constant tension, waiting for the next revelation, dreading what they might discover. There are moments of deep sadness that feel too real to dismiss, not because of swelling music or overacted grief, but because the pain feels earned and specific. When a character breaks down, it's not a dramatic release. It's a quiet implosion that mirrors the exhaustion of anyone who's ever tried to be heard and failed. The film makes audiences feel that exhaustion too, trapping them in the same emotional loop of hope and disappointment that defines its characters' lives. But Taken in Plain Sight doesn't confine its emotional reach to sorrow or fear. It provokes a wide spectrum of responses. There are moments of shock so subtle that viewers only realize their impact seconds later, when a single word, a phone call, or a small gesture reframes everything they thought they understood. The tension is psychological rather than physical, and that's what makes it so effective. Some viewers might even find themselves talking back to the screen, pleading for someone to speak up, to look closer, to do something before it's too late. The film understands that engagement isn't just about thrills, it's about participation. It invites audiences to fill in the silence with their own anxiety, making them complicit in the inaction it condemns. The filmmakers also master the rhythm of audience manipulation, when to release tension, when to tighten it again, when to offer a glimpse of hope only to snatch it away. A particularly striking technique is how the film uses pauses. Conversations end mid-sentence, questions go unanswered, and the camera lingers just long enough for the viewer to feel the discomfort of not knowing. This use of silence is where the audience's emotional investment deepens. Instead of providing cathartic relief, the film keeps its viewers suspended, aware of their own unease, forcing them to confront ambiguity rather than escape it. Audience reactions to the film often vary depending on personal experiences, which is part of its brilliance. For some, it's an edge-of-the-seat mystery about deception and discovery. For others, it's an emotional autopsy of how communities collapse under denial. That multiplicity of meaning gives it staying power. Viewers find themselves replaying certain scenes mentally long after the credits roll, trying to catch the moment where everything shifted, when innocence gave way to awareness. The film doesn't end when it ends. It lingers, prompting conversations about morality, justice, and complicity. It's the kind of movie that demands to be discussed, not just watched. Even the pacing of emotional beats feels tuned to audience psychology. Just when the story becomes unbearable, the film gives a brief reprieve. A scene of tenderness, a moment of nostalgia, a flicker of normalcy that reminds viewers what's at stake. These gentle interludes are never wasted. They reset emotional endurance and make the next descent into tension even more effective. By structuring its emotional rhythm like this, The film mimics real trauma, the way calm and chaos coexist, the way small joys persist even in darkness. Audiences respond to that realism instinctively, because it feels like life rather than fiction. The performances play a major role in how the film connects with viewers. Because the acting is grounded, every emotional beat feels authentic. When a character hesitates before speaking or avoids eye contact, viewers sense the weight of what's unspoken. The empathy the film generates isn't cheap. It's cumulative. By the time the major revelations arrive, the audience isn't just observing, they're emotionally entangled. They've absorbed the unease, the guilt, and the heartbreak. That's why even small moments, a hand on a shoulder, a door closing too slowly, carry enormous impact. Beyond emotion, Taken in Plain Sight engages intellectually as well. Its layered storytelling encourages viewers to decode its silences, to analyze motives, to pick up on recurring imagery and patterns. It's the kind of film that invites repeat viewings because every rewatch reveals new details. A line of dialogue that seemed innocent before now rings ominous, a background sound that foreshadowed something unnoticed. The filmmakers have constructed a puzzle that rewards attention, turning viewers into investigators themselves. That interactivity, emotional and analytical, is what makes the engagement so powerful. In theaters, the film creates a collective experience of tension. You can feel the audience breathing in sync, holding their breath during key moments, reacting not with gasps or applause but with heavy silence. It's the silence of shared recognition, the realization that the story unfolding on screen could happen anywhere to anyone. That communal unease is rare, and it's what makes Taken in Plain Sight feel more like an event than a simple screening. Ultimately, what keeps audiences hooked is the honesty of its emotional language. It never manipulates feelings for cheap impact. Instead, it earns every reaction by grounding them in truth. Viewers walk away unsettled, introspective, maybe even guilty, not because the film preaches, but because it reflects something raw and familiar about human nature. That's the true measure of engagement here. It doesn't just entertain, it challenges. It doesn't just tell a story. It turns the audience into part of that story, leaving them haunted by the thought that they, too, might have looked away when it mattered most. When placed beside other thrillers that explore abduction, deception, and moral blindness, Taken in Plain Sight 2024 distinguishes itself not through spectacle but through restraint. Most films in this genre rely on overt danger, kinetic chases, or procedural unraveling to grip audiences, but this one trades speed for stillness, urgency for unease. It feels closer in spirit to Prisoners or Mystic River than to more conventional thrillers like The Girl on the Train or Gone Girl, but even those comparisons only go so far, because Taken in Plain Sight doesn't seek to replicate their sense of closure or cathartic revelation. Instead, it lives in the quiet discomfort that follows when the truth refuses to satisfy. Where many genre peers treat discovery as resolution, this film treats it as corrosion. What happens when uncovering the truth only exposes how deep denial runs? The film's difference begins with its tone. While something like Gone Girl uses irony and theatrical deceit, Taken in Plain Sight uses ordinariness as its weapon. Its villainy isn't cinematic. It's domestic, familiar, and painfully plausible. The pacing recalls the slow, methodical burn of Zodiac but stripped of procedural gloss, opting instead for an emotional investigation rather than a criminal one. It's not concerned with the how of disappearance but with the why of silence, aligning it more closely with works like The Killing of a Sacred Deer or The Night of, which mine morality and guilt rather than straightforward suspense. The film seems aware of its cinematic lineage. It borrows tension structures and moral ambiguity from these predecessors, but it subverts expectations by refusing to deliver the genre's typical equilibrium. Instead of justice, it offers introspection. In comparison to other recent psychological thrillers, it stands out for how it refuses to sensationalize its subject. Many films dealing with similar topics lean into melodrama, amplifying trauma for emotional impact. Here the filmmakers do the opposite, they pull back. The result is unnerving realism. It's the kind of approach reminiscent of Spotlight, where the horror lies in bureaucracy and blindness rather than overt brutality. By adopting this subdued realism, Taken in Plain Sight positions itself as a character study wrapped in a mystery, rather than a mystery wrapped in shock value. It trusts its audience to feel dread without being shown every dark corner. When compared to other works by its director, Taken in Plain Sight feels like a natural evolution rather than a repetition. If earlier films leaned on stylistic precision or moral clarity, this one dismantles both. The direction here feels more vulnerable, less polished, as if the filmmaker finally decided to stop shielding viewers from discomfort. Long takes replace rapid edits, moral grays replace heroes and villains, and dialogue becomes a mirror rather than exposition. It's the kind of growth that suggests a director becoming more confident in stillness, in ambiguity, and in trusting silence to do what monologues cannot. Genre conventions are acknowledged but never obeyed. Most thrillers build toward confrontation, a revelation scene, a confession, a twist, but this film treats confrontation as poison. Every time the audience expects a neat resolution, it offers an emotional detour instead. The police procedural thread, for instance, is almost intentionally underplayed. The investigation exists but never dominates. Instead, focus stays on emotional fallout and community psychology, making it feel more like Manchester by the Sea wearing the clothes of a crime drama. It's a rare choice for a thriller to treat emotional paralysis as its climax rather than an obstacle, and that inversion gives it a haunting freshness. Where other films in its genre use visual and musical excess to generate suspense, Taken in Plain Sight opts for visual austerity. The cinematography doesn't stylize tension. It documents it. The lighting stays natural, the spaces feel uncomfortably real, and the visual rhythm echoes the unpredictability of memory. Compared to stylized thrillers like, say, 7N or The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, this one is almost anti-cinematic in its honesty. It denies viewers the safety of stylization. By stripping away the aesthetic polish typical of dark thrillers, the film makes its horror harder to escape. Viewers can't admire the craft from a distance. They have to sit inside its ordinariness. In terms of emotional temperature, it shares DNA with Prisoners, yet it diverges in moral tone. Prisoners externalizes guilt through violence and retribution. Taken in Plain Sight internalizes it. Its characters don't lash out, they shut down. The drama doesn't come from chasing suspects but from watching guilt corrode relationships. This reversal of dramatic energy gives the film its own emotional identity. Where most thrillers thrive on escalation, this one thrives on implosion. The absence of spectacle becomes its most unsettling spectacle. Even when compared to true crime dramatizations, it takes an unconventional stance. Instead of glorifying investigation or portraying victims as distant symbols, it draws attention to the ecosystem of silence that surrounds every tragedy. The narrative doesn't glamorize mystery. It critiques curiosity itself, the way people consume suffering as entertainment. In that sense, it has more in common with films like The Tale or Dark Waters, which use narrative restraint to expose collective failure. Yet Taken in Plain Sight goes further, implicating not just institutions but ordinary viewers. It positions the audience as both observer and participant, asking whether their fascination with such stories mirrors the voyeurism that enables real-world neglect. Even thematically, the film feels fresher than most of its peers. Where other thrillers cling to binary morality, innocent versus guilty, victim versus villain, this one dissolves those borders. It's less interested in punishment than in paralysis, in how guilt lingers when justice cannot cleanse it. That willingness to let ambiguity stand without moral resolution separates it from the mainstream. It's the kind of narrative courage that calls to mind European art thrillers like The Vanishing or Mother, which prefer haunting questions over satisfying answers. Compared to franchise thrillers that recycle familiar beats, Taken in Plain Sight feels riskier and more literary. It doesn't chase formula, it deconstructs it. It examines what the genre usually hides, the aftermath of discovery, the quiet years after the headline fades. While many thrillers end with the truth revealed, this one begins with it half known and explores the emotional wreckage it leaves behind. That inversion gives it both freshness and emotional gravity. In short, Taken in Plain Sight stands in conversation with its genre while deliberately speaking a different language. It borrows the skeleton of the psychological thriller but replaces its organs with something quieter, sadder, and far more human. It offers no heroes, no climactic justice, no moral clarity. Just a reflection of what happens when people fail to see what's right in front of them. In doing so, it expands what a thriller can be, proving that suspense doesn't always come from what's hidden, but from the unbearable tension of what's seen and still ignored. Taken in Plain Sight, 2024, may stand alone as a self-contained story, but it exists within a cinematic tradition that stretches far beyond its own runtime. It belongs to that lineage of psychological dramas and abduction thrillers where the real horror doesn't come from monsters or mayhem, but from the slow unraveling of trust and the unsettling recognition that evil can hide beneath normalcy. For audiences familiar with films like Prisoners, The Lovely Bones, or Room, this entry feels like a contemporary echo of that same haunting question. How could something so horrific happen in a place so ordinary? Yet what sets Taken in Plain Sight apart is its historical consciousness. While not based on a single true story, it's steeped in the atmosphere of real cases from the 1970s and 1980s. Eras when communities often dismissed warning signs, and when the boundaries of parental trust, law enforcement, and moral responsibility were far more ambiguous. The film's design, tone, and even its pacing are infused with a sense of authenticity that feels rooted in history rather than fiction. Its small-town setting could be any quiet American suburb from that period. Church picnics, neighborhood barbecues, and the polite smiles that conceal deep discomfort. The filmmakers meticulously reconstruct the social texture of that time, when conformity was considered safety and silence was often mistaken for decency. The costumes, cars, and household details don't just serve as nostalgic decoration. They ground the film in a world where denial wasn't just emotional, it was cultural. Every floral curtain, rotary phone, and beige sweater tells part of the story of a society that prided itself on appearances, often at the cost of confronting its own shadows. By situating itself in this quasi-historical framework, Taken in Plain Sight functions as both narrative and commentary. It reflects on a cultural moment when institutions, schools, churches, and even families were unprepared or unwilling to face uncomfortable truths. The film captures this tension through subtle choices. Police procedures that seem sluggish by today's standards, social norms that discourage confrontation, and an unspoken hierarchy of authority that allows manipulation to thrive. Rather than dramatizing history through explicit events, it absorbs it into the emotional DNA of the film. Viewers feel the time period not through exposition, but through the weight of its social expectations, the way people talk, hesitate, and defer. What makes this film fascinating in its broader cinematic context is how it extends and complicates the evolution of the true crime-inspired drama. Earlier entries in this genre often focused on the sensational, the chase, the rescue, the villain's psychology. Taken in Plain Sight pushes the genre toward introspection instead of spectacle. It's less concerned with how the crime happens and more with how the community allows it to happen. That shift marks an important progression in storytelling. A move from external conflict to collective moral inquiry. It's not just about what one person did, but what everyone failed to do. In that sense, it feels like the thematic heir to films like Spotlight or Doubt. Stories where institutions crumble under the pressure of truth, and where silence becomes its own form of guilt. If one views Taken in Plain Sight as part of a modern psychological realism cycle of cinema, it becomes a bridge between past and present. It borrows the slow burn pacing and domestic realism of classic dramas, while adopting the visual precision and emotional intimacy of contemporary filmmaking. The result feels almost timeless. You can sense the influence of 1970s investigative dramas in its deliberate rhythms, but also the raw, emotional immediacy of 21st century storytelling. This fusion gives the film a dual identity. It feels like it could have been released in 1984 or 2024, and it would still resonate in the same unsettling way. For viewers approaching it as a historical film, its authenticity is both visual and psychological. The era's gender dynamics are portrayed without exaggeration but with unflinching honesty. The way women's concerns are dismissed, how authority is unquestioned, and how politeness becomes a tool of suppression, all of it feels disturbingly accurate. These choices don't just build period credibility, they deepen the story's tragedy. The film doesn't need to show newspaper headlines or political context to remind you of the times. It embeds history in behavior. Every awkward dinner conversation, every polite dismissal, every misplaced trust becomes a historical document in itself. Interestingly, Taken in Plain Sight also positions itself as a kind of meta-commentary on the history of crime storytelling. It reflects how narratives about abduction and exploitation have evolved, from sensationalized media coverage to more reflective explorations of trauma and complicity. The film seems aware of its place in this lineage, even referencing it subtly through visual cues. A flickering television playing a vintage news report, a passing mention of a case from years ago, the way people discuss tragedy as entertainment. These touches make the film not just part of history, but a mirror held up to how we tell and consume stories about it. In the broader context of film history, Taken in Plain Sight feels like a deliberate response to decades of movies that have treated victims as plot devices and communities as mere settings. Here, the community is the story. Its structure, its silence, and its complicity form the true landscape of the narrative. That shift in focus, from the event to the environment, marks its contribution to the genre's evolution. It transforms the familiar framework of missing person stories into something far more unsettling, a study of how moral blindness becomes tradition, and how history repeats not through ignorance but through the comfort of forgetting. So while Taken in Plain Sight may not belong to a conventional franchise, it carries the weight of cinematic ancestry. It inherits the anxieties of Mystic River, the restraint of Manchester by the Sea, and the psychological precision of Zodiac, but distills them into its own quietly devastating form. It's a continuation of a long conversation in film history, about how societies hide their sins in plain sight, and a reminder that the most frightening stories aren't born from fantasy but from the past we refuse to see clearly. For Taken in Plain Sight 2024, getting hard numbers on budget and box office performance is tricky. Publicly available sources don't list a verified production budget or a full theatrical gross. What is available suggests the film had a much smaller scale of release and financial expectation than big studio features. Here's what we do know and how it frames the discussion of production quality versus financial performance. What the data suggests. According to streaming and digital platform listings, the film is marketed as a thriller made for TV/streaming release, e.g., on Netflix and Lifetime Movie Club, rather than a full theatrical distribution. For example, it's listed as available via Lifetime Movie Club. LifetimeMovieClub.com. A trade article mentions that once the film was added to Netflix, it quickly ranked in the top 10 list of trending titles in the US market. Tom's Guide. There is no public record, in the sources I found, of a large theatrical box office figure or marketing spend published for this title. Production quality in relation to budget. Given the modest release path, TV/streaming, limited theatrical or none, we can infer the budget was likely far lower than major theatrical thrillers. Despite that, the film shows evidence of competent production design, location work, and cast performances, meaning the team appears to have maximized resources. The production values don't reflect a high 6- or 7-figure blockbuster, but they're respectable for the category, suggesting a lean budget deployed with discipline. The fact that the film landed on Netflix and entered trending lists indicates it achieved a quality standard sufficient for a strong streaming rollout. Financial performance, marketing, and reception. Since the film seems to have gone either directly to streaming or had a very limited theatrical run, the usual box office metrics, opening weekend, worldwide gross, budget versus grosses, don't apply in the typical way. The article about its Netflix release suggests promotional momentum. The title crashed the top 10 list when added. Tom's Guide. This implies that streaming visibility played a key role in its financial model, perhaps more so than theatrical box office. The marketing appears to have leaned on digital and streaming platform placement rather than large theatrical campaigns. Reception is mixed. Some viewers praised the suspense elements, others criticized pacing or originality in user reviews. Rotten Tomatoes. That mixed reception may influence long-term viewer retention and word of mouth, which in turn affects streaming metrics, though these are rarely publicized. How to think about success. Because we don't have the full budget or box office numbers, the best lens is this. For a film of modest budget and a streaming/TV release path, success is measured differently than a theatrical blockbuster. Key factors include production quality relative to cost, securing a platform like Netflix, entering trending charts, and engaging audiences enough to generate platform pickup or licensing deals. In that sense, Taken in Plain Sight appears to have met many of those markers: platform placement, visibility, even if it didn't follow the blockbuster profit model. In short, we can't point to $X million budget and $Y million box office gross with certainty for this film, but the available evidence suggests it aligned its scale with its distribution path, meaning production quality seems commendable for its budget category, and streaming traction likely counts as its financial success measure more than box office. If you're ready to dive into Taken in Plain Sight 2024, here's a complete guide on where to watch it and how to experience it in the most immersive way possible. The movie is widely available across multiple platforms, giving audiences plenty of options to choose from. It's currently streaming on major platforms like Hulu and Netflix, where it found a strong audience presence, especially after trending in the top 10 list shortly after release. For those who prefer official network releases, it's also available through Lifetime Movie Club, which originally distributed the film. Each platform offers slightly different viewing experiences, depending on whether you want to stream it directly, download it for offline viewing, or catch it with curated recommendations. If you don't have access to subscription platforms, the film can also be rented or purchased digitally on services like Amazon Prime Video and Apple TV. These versions are available in HD and typically include bonus options such as subtitles and language settings for accessibility. Renting is a great choice if you want to experience the movie once, while purchasing gives you permanent access for repeat viewings or deeper rewatch analysis. Because the film's tone leans heavily towards suspense, psychological tension, and emotional depth rather than flashy spectacle, the way you watch it makes a big difference. The ideal setting is quiet and dimly lit, where you can focus on every subtle sound and expression. The story thrives on atmosphere, the silence between dialogues, the tension in still moments, the uneasy calm before key reveals, so using quality headphones or a good sound system really enhances the emotional pull. The audio design plays an essential role in creating suspense, and missing those layers on low volume or with background distractions can take away from the film's intensity. For the best cinematic impact, it's worth watching it in one sitting without too many pauses. The pacing is deliberate and designed to build gradually, drawing you deeper into its unsettling mood. A late evening viewing can amplify the experience since the movie's visual palette, shadowy interiors, muted lighting, and nighttime sequences, resonates with darker surroundings. Watching on a larger screen also helps capture the framing, small gestures, and environmental details that carry so much of the film's meaning. Regional availability may vary depending on your country, but the film is accessible in most territories either through streaming subscriptions or digital rental. If one platform doesn't list it in your area, checking an alternate service like Amazon or Apple TV usually works. Some regions also offer it as part of cable or satellite movie bundles, especially under Lifetime's distribution deals, so it's worth scanning your local on-demand section. Overall, Taken in Plain Sight is best experienced with full attention and the right atmosphere. Low light, good sound, and minimal distractions. It's not a film you half-watch while multitasking. It's one that rewards focus, quiet, and emotional openness, the kind of movie that creeps under your skin when you give it the space to do so. Whether you stream, rent, or purchase it, the key is to watch it in a way that lets its subtle storytelling and haunting tension unfold exactly as intended.